Sluggish economic growth, the high interest rates and soaring unemployment are painting a pretty bleak picture, for South Africans. And now there's talk of a possible increase in VAT. As government mouths austerity measures, there's talk of hiking VAT to increase tax revenue. Well, for more on this, I'm joined by Director and Chief Economist of Econometrix, Dr Azar Jammine. Dr Jammine, appreciate your time this evening. Now, South Africans have been struggling for the last couple of years. Everything but their salaries has been going up. Now there's talk, and according to you, VAT is the next option that might be going up.
I don't think you're exactly correct in saying everything but their salaries have been going up, because part of the reason for wanting to raise the rate of VAT is that the salaries of public servants are being increased by 7.5%, and government needs money to pay for that because it had not budgeted for such an increase in public servant remuneration. The other factor that is at the heart of the call for higher rate of VAT is that there are calls from within the ruling party to extend the special social relief for distress grant of 350 Rand a month to around 8 million people who cannot access other forms of social grants and don't have any jobs, to extend this for a further year. At present, the budget only considers funding this SRD until March next year. So if it were to be extended for another year, the government would need to find an additional 40 to 50 billion Rand. And if it's to be incorporated on a permanent basis, that means 40 to 50 billion Rand every single year. And unless the government then starts increasing its borrowing requirement and running a bigger budget deficit, it has to cut back either on other programs that it has budgeted, or it has to raise taxes. And that is why it has been mooting the increase in the rate of VAT. It's one of the most certain ways in which government can collect more revenue. And for every 1% increase in the rate of VAT, currently one would get about 27 billion Rand. So with a 2% increase in the VAT rate from 15 to 17%, in the short term, the government could stand to raise an extra 54 billion Rand. But that is before taking into account the negative effects which a hike in VAT would have on people's ability to spend on everything else, so that the fuller impact in terms of government revenue may not be quite as high as 55 billion Rand from a 2% hike in the VAT rate.
So Dr. Jammine, in your opinion, outside of raising VAT and obviously an increase on borrowing more money, these would be the only two options that are available to government?
Yes, they would, and they're not very pleasant options, because raising the rate of VAT obviously has a massive negative effect, especially if it's 2%, on people's living standards, and especially the poor, who actually don't pay any taxes that people like you and I, who earn a reasonable salary, we have to pay personal income tax. The poor don't earn any income, the unemployed, and yet via their expenditure on VAT do contribute to the fiscus that way. And so they would be the ones who would bear the brunt of hike in the VAT rate more than anyone, because also proportionately speaking, they don't save, they just spend, and therefore they would be spending. There's a VAT component in everything, in most things that they do spend. So it's a very negative thing. On the other side, if the government were to borrow more, well, it would send the cost of servicing that debt even still higher than it is right now. Part of the problem currently is that nearly 20% of government revenue goes towards funding interest payments on the debt that has already been incurred. And that eats into the government's ability to provide the very benefits that we're talking about in terms of social grants.
So before government goes and starts borrowing or hiking taxes, is there anything that government is spending money on that they shouldn't?
Corruption. You can't see it directly, but indirectly, of course. And this has been the price that we are paying for over a decade of corrupt practices that have seen so much of the country's tax revenue being siphoned off into the pockets of a handful of connected individuals, politically connected individuals. We are now paying the price for that.
So if we look at the numbers, I mean, you talk about corruption. Government is trying to raise anything between 40 and 50 billion to finance the issues that you speak of. Just how much is lost to corruption, or has been lost to corruption in the recent past?
There are various estimates, but my own estimate is that over the past decade and a half, we've seen somewhere between 1.5 and 3 trillion rand being lost to corrupt practices. We wouldn't be having the problems with Eskom and Transnet that we're having right now were it not for corruption there. And it's endemic, and it seems to be continuing to the present. We hear about it every day. And what is disturbing people is that we have not yet seen enough action taken against corrupt practices up until now.
So when we look at decisions like this or that are before government, it always boils down to the politics versus the economics. Now, in the context of an impending general election, how does the political landscape affect government's willingness to implement austerity measures or tax increases?
Obviously, there is huge opposition from within the government to austerity measures and the notion of higher taxes to pay for that. Finance Minister Godongwana seems to be a bit of a lone voice in saying, guys, we have to follow this path, or else the debt will rise uncontrollably. But there are many within government who said, so what? Let's just borrow more. And that's precisely one of the important reasons why the rand has been depreciating further and further through the course of this year. It's not the only reason, but that's been an important reason, because investors wanting to take up South African bonds, which the government issues, government bonds which the government issues in order to pay, that's the way it borrows the money, it issues bonds, are becoming more and more demanding and saying, well, we want to then, you, government, to pay us a higher interest rate, a bigger premium to entice us to take the risks that we see looming in terms of those in the government not willing to stomach austerity measures and calling for still more government borrowing. And this could degenerate into a vicious spiral that we've seen in a number of other countries over the past decades, where the ultimate result is that the government, the only way it can pay its way is to print money, and that causes massive inflation, which in turn impacts still more on the poor than the rich, who can defend themselves against inflation by hedging into investments that do protect against inflation. That is the scenario that we would head for if the ruling party did not pay heed to its finance minister and try and control its expenditure. I'm hopeful that sanity will still prevail. We will have a lot of information in that regard on the 1st of November with a tabling of the medium-term budget policy statement.
Well, before we get to 1st of November, let's get to our final question, which is how can government strike a balance between addressing its fiscal challenges and ensuring the well-being of its citizens, especially those who rely on social services funded by the state?
It requires really considering the benefits and the state of being of the country at large, and that actually entails a lot of the government members taking the hit in themselves and being compelled to follow a path of austerity. It means a lot of internal wrangling within the ruling party, a ruling alliance between those who believe that the way out is simply to borrow still more, and those who believe that the government has to cut its cloth to suit its suit.
Well, appreciate your time. That was Director and Chief Economist of Econometrix, Dr Azar Jammine, speaking to us this evening about the impending VAT raise.